Hello students, welcome to the session today. My name is Preetham and I will be your facilitator for today's session on fundamentals of economics, brought to you by Indian Institute of Banking and Finance. This will be your first lecture for Module 1, Trimester 1 of the BFSI course Banking part. Why do we, aspiring BFSI professionals, need to study economics? Well, the answer is simple. Economics as a discipline equips you with the basic concepts to understand how and why things function in a certain way in the financial world. It provides you with the critical understanding of markets and its dynamics. To summarize, this discipline teaches you the foundation of finance in a cognitive way. So, do stay with me for the next few minutes. We will start with the definition and types, gradually moving into the important concepts of demand and supply, as well as inflation. Economics as a discipline is a study on how the societies or countries as a whole distribute or allocate essentially scarce resources among its relevant constituents in an efficient manner for an optimized output. This is necessarily achieved by understanding the output numbers, we call them statistics, published time to time by the government. These numbers explain the current status of the economy and also the expected outcomes, basis which the government subsequently frames its policies. Now, these numbers can represent a smaller or individual entities like a single firm or a company, or a larger entity like the whole country's economy. If the study is about a smaller entity like an individual market or individual interactions, it is called microeconomics. On the contrary, if the study involves the whole economy, covering multiple sectors and markets with external and even environmental issues, it is called macroeconomics. As their name suggests, macro means vast and micro means small or limited. Now, both of these, that is micro and macroeconomic factors, essentially function in cycles of fast growth, followed by diminished growth or degrowth at times. This phenomena is called as economic cycle and is fundamentally factored by the overall demand and supply in the economy. Now, how many types of economies are there? Well, they can range for traditional economies with century-old conventional norms like we have seen in the rural parts of the pre-independent India with almost no occupational or financial mobility, to the highly evolved market-driven economies we see now in the West with very little or no government intervention. We are also familiar with the state-regulated command economies of the erstwhile USSR or Eastern Europe, which is predominantly socialistic, with the power to allocate resources being highly centralized. In modern India, we generally come across the mixed or dualistic economic system, which is primarily market driven, but there is a definite government intervention in policy formulations, especially keeping in mind the welfare of the rural and marginalized population. The foundation of any economy or economic policy is essentially the demand and supply. Let us try and understand these two very important concepts. Now, demand for a product or a service depends on its price, isn't it? If the price of a product is too high, people will not buy it. On the other hand, if a product is priced reasonably low, people will definitely buy. This actually is the law of demand, where we say that the demand is inversely proportional to price. Even we see in the graph below, demand for a product is Q2 when the price is P2. When the price is increased to P1, the demand falls to Q1. When the price is decreased to P3, the quantity demanded suddenly grows to Q3. If we join these points, we get a downwardly sloping curve. This is called the demand curve. On the other hand, if imagine that you are a supplier of a particular product in the market. If the price of that item is high, you will definitely want to supply it even more, hoping for a higher profit, isn't it? This is called the law of supply, where the supply is directly proportional to the price of the product. Referring to the graph on the right, the price of a product has gradually increased from P1 to P3. The corresponding quantity supplied had also increased from Q1 to Q3 in similar proportions, in line with the law of supply. If we join the corresponding points, we get an upwardly sloping curve called the supply curve. Now, if we join these two curves, the demand and supply curves will intersect each other. The point in which they intersect is called the equilibrium point. The equilibrium point signifies an ideal and balanced scenario wherein the market demand equals the market supply, thus creating an efficient market. The area above the equilibrium point denotes the surplus part, that is, the supply is more than the demand. The area below the equilibrium point, on the other hand, shows the shortage part, where demand is more than the actual supply. Now, if we are to describe the phenomena of demand mathematically, we may use the demand function dn, which is a function of Pn, Ps, Pc, T, and Y. This essentially means, okay, let me just elaborate on this. Pn means the price of the commodity N, Ps is the price of the substitute item, Pc is the price of the complement, T is the taste for the consumer, and Y is the income of the consumer. Similarly, supply function Sx can also be written as a function of Px, Pi, W, T, and Gp. This means that the supply of a particular commodity or service is dependent on its price, the price of the inputs, as well as varied factors like weather conditions, technology involved, and prevalent government policies. So, we have widely talked about the important concept of price while we discussed demand and supply. This brings us to another critical concept, the concept of money and money supply. What is money? Money is something that we exchange for a product or a service. It has value, hence it is scarce. Starting from the ancient barter system to the ultra-modern bitcoins or cryptocurrencies, money has evolved a great deal, but the basic features remain the same. It is a portable, divisible, and acceptable medium of exchange that can be traded for or converted into another asset. Hence, it is critical for governing authority to know exactly how much money is there in the market at any given point of time. From a country's perspective, the statistic of money supply, which is periodically published by Reserve Bank of India, tells us just that. It tells the total stock of money circulating in the economy at any given point of time in the form of printed currency notes, deposit accounts, and other liquid assets. This now brings us to a different measures of money supply, as Reserve Bank of India monitors closely to understand the exact quantum of money that is there in the system. On the below mentioned measures, the two very important concepts are narrow money, which is M1, and broad money, M3. Narrow money refers to the physical money, such as the coins and the currencies, demand deposits, and other liquid assets that are easily accessible to central banks. Narrow money is a subset of broad money that includes long-term deposits and other deposit-based accounts. While all these four denote the measures of money supply, the reasons for increased or decreased money supply depends on a lot of important factors like availability of bank credit, government expenditure, foreign inflows, etc. In case the government wishes to increase the flow of money in the economic system, it frames or revises its policies accordingly. For example, the foreign trade policy is devised by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry to facilitate international trade, therefore increasing foreign exchange flows. However, too much money in the system means that the money has lost its actual value. It is not scarce anymore. It's the purchasing power. Its purchasing power has gone down considerably. This situation is called inflation, wherein the average price of a selected basket of commodities or services has increased so much over time that one needs a lot of currency to buy those. This can happen in three scenarios. If the demand outweighs the supply considerably, the price increases. This is called the demand pull inflation. For example, we had seen the price of onion spiraling upwards due to a fall in supply. Secondly, increase in the prices of raw materials can also increase the price of the finished product. This situation is called the cost push inflation. And finally, it can also be driven by the spiral of expectation. When the prices grow, the people in general need more money to keep up their standard of living. That is, people expect more income. This also leads to inflation, called the built-in inflation this time. Now, how to measure inflation? We have more or less heard or read about terms like wholesale price index and consumer price index. Both of these are fairly effective statistics to measure inflation in the economy, while WPI covers the ex factory, that is, without tax prices of a basket of commodities from agriculture, mining, manufacturing, and electricity sectors. CPI, Consumer Price Index, considers retail prices with taxes of a basket of commodities or consumer articles from foods and beverages, clothing and footwear, fuel, light, and other miscellaneous items. The government has adopted CPI to be the more representative of the two, since it captures the actual consumption expenditure of the country's population. Thirdly, GDP deflator is also considered a fairly comprehensive measure as it covers the entire spectrum of economic activity. It is essentially the ratio between GDP at current prices versus GDP at constant prices. GDP being the monetary value of all finished goods and services made within a country during a specified period. So, this brings us to the end of today's session on the fundamentals of economics. See you again. Thank you and happy learning. Best wishes.